trying it on their own. Sarah allows Abraham to meet with Hagar. They bear Ishmael. And in the reading from last week that we missed because I was out of town, Sarah makes a deal, and God promises her that Ishmael and his descendants will be blessed. Most of us consider those descendants to be Muslims. So when we read these holy scriptures, we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean for God to bless the people of the Prophet Muhammad, the people who ascribe to Islam? I can't answer that question for you. But the story continues. It's a fascinating story. A story that reminds us of our own trials and tribulations, of our own desire to fix what God has promised will be whole. And so we find a story that we're all familiar with, terribly familiar with, and I use terrible intentionally. It's a story of the binding of Isaac. Abraham is blessed, along with Sarah, in their late years to have a child, and he's arguably a teenager at this point in time, and God calls him to sacrifice his son. Law family, Wagner family, are y'all ready to sacrifice Caleb? I thought so. And yet we all know, as jovial as that is, and as true as many of us have been there, right, that we wouldn't dare. And after these events, God tested Abraham. For those of you reading the King James Bible, it says that God tempted Abraham. I think that's an interesting use of the word. Abraham answered, "I'm here." So God said, "Take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him up an entirely burnt offering there on one of the mountains that I will show you." So Abraham got up early in the morning, harnessed his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, together with his son Isaac. He split the wood for the entirely burned offering, set out, and went to the place God had described to him. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place at the distance. Abraham said to his servant, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will walk up there, worship, and then come back to you." Many will describe this statement here as a statement of faith, that we will come back. Abraham took the wood for the entirely burned offering and laid it on his son Isaac. He took the fire and the knife in his hand, and the 2 of them walked on together. Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father." Abraham said, "I'm here, my son." The second time he says this. Isaac said, "Here's the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the entirely burned offering?" An astute observation. Abraham said to him, "The lamb for the entirely burned offering? Well, God will see to it, my son." Another statement of faith. The 2 of them walked on together, and they arrived at the place God had described to him. Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He tied up his son Isaac and laid him on the altar top of the wood, and at this point in time, Isaac goes, "What?" Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice, but the Lord's messenger called out to Abraham from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." And Abraham said, "I'm here." The messenger said, "Don't stretch out your hand against the young man, and don't do anything to him. I know now that you revere God and didn't hold back your son, your only son, from me." Abraham looked up and saw a single ram caught by its horn in the dense underbrush. And Abraham went over and took the ram, offered it as an entirely burnt offering instead of his son. Abraham named the place, "The Lord Sees." This is the reason the people say today, "On this mountain the Lord is seen." Almighty and everlasting Father, pour out your Spirit in this place. May the words of my meditation, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of every heart be pleasing to you. Amen. What a difficult scripture, and one where Abraham may very well have been saying, "How long, O Lord? Please don't make me do this." All the scriptures that speak of Abraham talk about his faith. Paul says that it is rendered unto him as righteousness. His faith. His faith was about to cause him to kill his own son. Dare I ask, how many of you have a faith so great that you would sacrifice your own child? I don't think mine is. And we've heard many sermons, I'm sure, on this passage. Many pastors and scholars have postulated about Abraham's faith, and I think the scripture here and the scriptures later are clear that indeed Abraham has a great faith. But nestled deep in this story is a little something else. Our series is about chaos and what it means for God to move from chaos to something of order, that God will organize into a community, namely the church. Wherever there is chaos, God is working towards order. In the first Genesis story, it's ordering the light and the day. In the last stories, it's organizing the church into the bride. And then all the stuff in the middle is about God working towards some sort of community. God promises Abraham a community, Isaac and Jacob a community. God promises that there will be chaos no more. There was a flood, or there's a flood a-coming in the story, and God will move that chaos towards a community. And so we look for this theme from chaos to community in the story. And when we look deep enough, we find it, and we can find it in our scriptures and in the ancient Near East literature outside of the scriptures. But suffices to say that if we go just to 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 27, we'll find that this was a common practice in most ancient faiths to sacrifice your son. In this instance, the king of the Canaanites is trying to win a battle, and so he tries to appease his god, Molech, by sacrificing his son, and he does just this. He kills his own son in the hope that he can win a battle. Most of us would rather lose the battle. We'd rather be washed out into nothingness than have to give up our own child. And yet this was a common practice in the ancient world. So, naturally, when God tempts Abraham, Abraham says, my faith is just as strong as all of these other people who are willing to kill their children. I will do it too. If this is what you command, I will do it. And Abraham takes up this helm of child sacrifice in the hopes of pleasing God and making a name for his God. Oh, my God is so great, I killed my own son. So it's fascinating then that God stops Abraham in the act. He could have let him kill him, but instead, I think there's a bit of God here, not only testing Abraham, but tempting him to behave in the same way that all the other religions are behaving. Tempting him to say, I love you just as much as the Canaanites love their God, in fact more. I love you the same way. I'll do the same things that they do. I'll do everything. I'll bow down before you. I'll kill my child. I'll fast for weeks on end. Whatever it takes, God, to show my love to you, I will do it. And I think that God is tempting him with this idea that do it just the same way that all of those other religions and nations are doing it to their weak and puny gods. And when Abraham does it, indeed God does count it as faith and righteousness. But at the conclusion of this story, God doesn't just allow the chaos to continue and keeps inviting us to kill our children. That would be atrocious and terrible. We would shun and mock any God who would invite us to do that. Instead, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yahweh, the God who goes unnamed throughout Scripture, they call Adonai, the God of the creation and the world, says no more. We know this when we look to Hosea, the prophet, in chapter 6:6. God says to the people, I desire not sacrifice. I desire not sacrifice, but mercy. And when many of us are out sacrificing our friends and family, whether in real life or on Facebook, sacrificing other people within the church, God says, no more. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Because the people of God were always trying to figure out, what does God want? Maybe I can burn some lamb on the altar. Maybe I can burn my child on the altar. What does this God who we worship want? The Scripture continues to tell us this all throughout its narrative. Mercy. In fact, in Micah 6:8, we all know, God says, or the prophet asks, what does the Lord require of you? And the answer is given to seek justice, to love mercy or kindness, and to walk humbly with our God. None of those things include killing our innocent children, but instead they require us to engage in our community. What is justice if it is not seeking justice for someone else who does not have justice? And we can be included in that. What is mercy and kindness if it does not include our neighbor, a part of our community who has not been given that kindness and that mercy? And what does it mean to walk humbly with our God if it does not mean to walk in the way in which Jesus walked through this world, which was taking care of the least of his community, of lifting up the blind man and the prostitute and the broken people of the world, the leper, and putting them back into the community where they belong. This is what the Lord requires of us. Not sacrifice, but mercy, justice, kindness, humility. So when we think about this story of Abraham and God's tempting him, or at least when I think of this story, I don't think, oh, Abraham was such a wonderful person and he was willing to kill his son. I think Abraham was doing what everybody else was doing, and yes, he had faith. Yes, he loved Yahweh. But our God is so great that he stopped and he said, no. No more, no longer will you kill in my name. No longer will you sacrifice your own children or those of your rivaling nation. No longer will I demand death, but instead life. And one more time God demanded a sacrifice, and it wasn't from any of us, it was from himself, his son, Jesus the Christ. He demanded this sacrifice so that we would never sacrifice again. We don't burn lambs on the altar anymore, even though Abraham did. We don't burn anything on the altar anymore. Instead, at this altar, at this table, we eat. There's something a little bit chaotic about burning a dead animal on a table. Is that? Yeah. Something a bit strange about it. Y'all are about to go roast your pigs or whatever. To me, there's still something a bit chaotic and gross about it, right? And that pleasing aroma to you, maybe pleasing to God, but it smells like dead animal to me. But God invites us instead to this table. And at this table we commune. Hence the name. At this table, God says, no longer do you need to please me with burnt offerings or with good works or with how much you've done for this church, how well you cleaned up the pew when you left, how much you did for so and so, how often you attended. Any of you got pins from Sunday school attendance? It doesn't matter. That doesn't please God. It's pretty cool, but it doesn't please God. Instead, if you want to please God, commune with somebody. Commune with someone you love. Commune with someone you don't know. Commune with someone you don't like. Commune with one another and be holy. Part of our communion requires a little bit of a sacrifice. It requires that we confess our sin. Now, I can't speak for you, but I'm full of it.